in May. We've had a rainy first week of May, but thank goodness the weather cooperated for our Ag Day last Saturday. So we're not complaining too much about the weather that we had for the rest of the week, since we had a great day for Ag Day last Saturday. And we're checking in and just getting a couple people on board here, a couple people just checking in, and I have a couple announcements that I want to make here. And checking in that we have everybody on board, a couple people just checking in here. Get people on board.
Just so everyone's aware, if you can mute your sound unless you are speaking, that will be great for us not having feedback through the recording. And if you're calling in on the phone, if you can mute that, then it doesn't pick up any background noise during the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started because we have quite a number of people on board and we have lots to do today. And I want to say thanks for joining on this rainy Friday morning. I have a couple quick announcements before we get into our program, planned program with Jennifer Daniels as we continue our professional development training. We have a couple things to do and a couple people joining us this morning. First, I want to remind everyone today is the last day for our apparel order, and want to encourage you to place your apparel order. You can do that by phone. I'm sorry, you can do that. I have a phone picture that just came up. You can do that by sending your email to Alice today on the order form that was provided with First Friday with the Directors Weekly, and place that in with Alice today. We've had quite a few orders. We have a nice order, but we are going to call that order in. Today's the last day. We're placing that first thing Monday morning. We want to get that in. So please place your orders if you'd like something on the apparel order. Alice did a really nice job with that order form where you can see what you're ordering this time. She has pictures with that order form, and place your orders if you want something. Just a reminder about that today. Secondly, I am proclaiming today, update your reporting. Due to the weather of the continuous days of rain that we have had, I am proclaiming today the official update your reporting day. You can't go out in the field today. You can't run around do your errands. Who wants to be out doing that today? It's just a great day to be in your office. I need to proclaim it cleaning up my office and take care of your reporting day. So Jennifer Volk and I were talking about this week, and we are 1/3 of the way through the year, and pretty soon the skies will be clearing and we will be all running like mad to be out running around doing all the things that we wish we were doing today in lovely weather. And so proclaiming today is catch up in your reporting. I'm going to hope you're going to barrel our system over today by getting into the system, putting in those days for the first quarter and through April, actually, if you could, of the meetings you've had, the days that you've spent on various plan of work. And we're particularly asking you, if you haven't heard from your program leaders yet, put in your attendance that you've had at your meetings, including the race and gender of the participants that you've had, and hopefully you've noted down what that is. And if not, we ask you to put your best estimation of what that was by race and gender into that, because we do need that data for our civil rights reporting. We had a lot of numbers, but we had not a lot of clarity about race and gender on that last year's reporting, and we need to improve on that. So today is declared the official University of Delaware reporting day. So jump on board, be a part of that, bomb the system today with your reporting due to the weather. So I hope you'll participate in that as well. I know you'll be very excited to do that. Get a cup of coffee, get your favorite tea, water, your favorite beverage. Let me just leave it at that. And do your reporting. And I know you're all laughing at that. Do whatever you need to do. Get that reporting done. And I don't need to know the rest of it. Just get your reporting done. Tell me later. And finally, there's one other thing that you can do today, and I'm going to share this in written instruction in our Directors Weekly this week, some information. Last fall, the president of the interim president, Nancy Target, sent out information about our security system and something called two-factor authentication. Two-factor authentication. And it's often abbreviated 2FA. So a new acronym for us, 2FA. And I've asked Yohannes to join us this morning and to share about two-factor authentication and what that means for us. Some of us have had to use this already and be involved in this as a security process for us, but we are now going to a process that all of us who use computers will have to have this two-factor authentication. I'm going to go to 2FA here in saying that. And we're all going to have to be involved in this by June 15th and have this process completed. And it's you all recall several years ago we did have some hacking into university computers, and this is a result of having this more secure. I was talking to some colleagues, and other universities have already gone to this and have used this, so this is not unique to Delaware. But Yohannes, let me turn it over to you, and you can provide some oral instructions and respond to any questions, and then we will have written instructions on this in Directors Weekly this week, as well as the links that you'll need to go to get this accomplished. So Yohannes, turning this over to you to give some background and information on two-factor authentication.
Okay. Hello. Hi, everyone. Like Dr. Roger said, June 15 is the everyone should have two-factor. So, for example, if you're trying to access VPN from off campus, you cannot access without two-factor after June 15. So basically, the instruction is on the IT website. So everyone should register. This is how we register. Basically, you just log into register two-factor, and you put your credential, and then the primary method authentication is your phone, your cell phone. Like there is app, Google Authenticator for Android device or for iPhone or iPad. That's the primary one, but you can still also access through text or through voicemail. So you can, once you log into the website, you will get more instruction. So the good thing about two-factor is it's even someone find your password, they cannot log in to access your information, because every time you log in, you need they need the code. The code is changing like every 30 seconds. So this is one layer, additional layer of protecting your information, also protecting university information. So June 15 is again, June 15 is the deadline. So please log in and try to register. If for some reason, if it doesn't work, please call us or submit IT help request form so we can help you. If anyone have a question, please let me know. So that's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Yohannes, for that. And are there any questions? Anyone want to jump in with any questions at this point? You can either type them in the chat screen or just turn your audio on and ask any questions. Are there any questions at this point related to that? Okay, Michelle Wofford says she's done it and it's easy to use. There we go. Nancy Mears says the same thing. I'm done, very easy. Well, great. We've got people already done, Yohannes. We're ahead of the curve down here. That's good news. That's good news. And that's another great thing we can proclaim today. Get your two-factor authentication done as well. So we'll get Directors Weekly out here this morning as well, which has the links and the instructions in it. You can get this done. And thank you, Yohannes, for doing that. I think the Directors Weekly, we also have the link, if you have questions, that you can link right into Yohannes to the form to ask questions and get responses. So thanks, Yohannes, for helping with that.
You're welcome.
All right. I think at this point we have with us Jennifer Daniels, and we had great response to the first part of the training that Jennifer has provided. She's since done this training as well for us for our Lead Delaware program, and she's been out and about doing this training for others who have appreciated it. And Jennifer, I was glad to meet you in person at that training, and I'm glad to welcome you back to our first Friday, and it just seems like this month went away in a hurry, and it was just yesterday you were with us. But thanks for rejoining us, and I won't take any more of your time, but turn it over to you to complete our training with you this morning. Thanks for joining us again today.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for having me, and hello to all of you again. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Just give me a moment so that we can pull up the PowerPoint. Okay, and let me just go ahead and get that into presentation mode. So this is going to be a continuation from the first part of the training that we had. Now, I'm not going to have any activities in this one because it's a little bit more front-loaded with a lot more information, but I do still want to keep the floor open for questions, concerns, anything that you want to ask or a comment that you may have, and we can do so anonymously. I won't read your name out, but this can be a really great avenue for us to learn together as we kind of work through some of these issues and how we're going to create an inclusive campus climate. So please do feel free to interject at any time, and I will be checking the chat just to make sure that we don't have any questions as we go. So we'll go ahead and get started. And this is the part two from the last presentation and workshop that we did together. So we'll go ahead and go through things. So first, let's just kind of talk about the overview of what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to get a little bit into the reason why we're doing this outside of the ethical, moral standpoint of we want to have inclusive environments. We're going to talk a little bit about Delaware Will Shine. We'll talk specifically to what is a positive campus climate, going into what are microaggressions and biases, and how they really affect the individual and affect our entire campus or units as a whole. And then we'll talk about ways that we can really offset or mitigate some of the effects of our biases and microaggressions, which we'll go into later in this presentation. And then lastly, we'll talk about what we can do, how we can intervene, and essentially be better bystanders and coworkers and community members, essentially, because this goes much further than just in our workplace. So we'll go ahead through and start first with really talking about, this is specific, pulled specifically from the Delaware Will Shine strategic plan. And essentially what we're talking about here is creating positive and inclusive campus climates, ones that really commit and value diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you'll have to forgive me because anytime the chat comes up, I'm going to check it out to make sure it's no one asking me a question, but that's not for me, so we're okay. But essentially, this is the premise of what we're following and why we are doing this. And again, this is coming from the Delaware Will Shine strategic plan and working behind Dr. Carol Henderson, who's our Vice Provost of Diversity. We follow under her lead as far as trying to really create inclusive campus climates. So going into our next slide. If the next slide will click, there we go. Okay, so let's talk about, well, what exactly is a positive campus climate? And it's first going to start with, first you need all three of these that you see here on the screen. And it starts first with leveraging diversity. So when we talk about leveraging diversity, that's essentially saying, well, what systems do we have in place so that all individuals can be successful? We're not going to get into that as much today. The two parts that we're going to be really focusing on in this workshop is fostering inclusion and maintaining equity and fairness. And fostering inclusion can go from anything of how we really value difference to our everyday communication and conversations that we have around students or around others, or around our coworkers within the workplace. Are those conversations, are the things that we are doing really valuing and showing the value in difference and making people feel included? And then maintaining equity and fairness, of course, that's exactly as it reads. Are our systems, are our units, the way that we handle our business, is it fair, is it equitable, and is it inclusive? When we have all three of these points, I'll use my pointer here, okay, that is going to help us achieve a positive campus climate. And ultimately, that's what we want to do. So when we go into, well, let's start first with biases, right? Now, what we have to be clear here, I don't always want to talk about this in a negative context, which we will talk about it and how it can be negative. But it's important to know that it's something that we all have, which are biases. So when we talk about biases, what are they? Essentially, they're a disposition, right? We can have a bias toward French wine, but we can also have a bias toward people, right? So a bias is essentially a partiality toward a place, a thing, or individuals. There are two types of biases that we should talk about here. And the first, of course, are unintentional biases versus our intentional biases. So when we talk about intentional biases, these are the biases that are more blatant and overt, right? We have no problem really saying that we have them, or that we have a disposition towards something, or that we're uncomfortable with a certain type of people. But what can be more problematic really are unintentional biases. And I'm going to tell you why. First and foremost, it's because these unintentional biases are generally really subtle or hidden. We don't really know that we have them until we are faced with a situation that brings this bias into the forefront. And I like to go to a specific case study, a peer-reviewed journal that did a survey on about 100 families. Now, all of these families, this was a racial study in this particular instance, but I want to use it to highlight what a subtle bias or unintentional bias may be. And in this survey, they asked the 100 families of the parents, okay, the couples, if they had a disposition toward ethnic minorities. More than 80% of the group said, absolutely not. I don't have a bias toward ethnic minorities, no problem at all. They resurveyed the same group after a certain particular amount of time and asked that the next question on this survey was, would you have a problem if your son or daughter married an ethnic minority? Well, I'm going to tell you, those numbers now cut in half. So what was 80%, over 80% of this group saying they didn't have a disposition toward ethnic minorities, now turned into 37% of this group's now only 37% said that they would not have an issue with their son or daughter dating an ethnic minority. And that's just an example of a subtle or hidden bias. And this can come out in more ways than race. Okay, this can come out when we're talking about the LGBTQ population. You may say, you know, I don't have a problem with people being gay or lesbian or bisexual. But if our son or daughter or our friends or people close to us were to claim that status, in many regards, it would make some of us uncomfortable now. That's an example of an unintentional bias. You don't really know that you have it until you are faced with the situation that brings it out into the forefront. So when we move into this next point of, well, am I biased? Yes, you are. Even though I'm speaking about this in how biases can affect us in negative ways. What we all have to understand is that bias is not particular to one group, okay? It's not particular to the majority. It is particular really to all of us. We are all biased. And you're probably wondering, well, how? How does that happen? How can I actually be biased? I don't think that I'm very biased at all. Well, our biases are created, and studies show that we create our biases as early as 4 years old. That's when we start our first biases. How does that happen? Quite simply from our environment, the experiences that we have in our life, our education, so on and so forth, person and environment. And I'm going to take a moment just to check the chat and make sure, nope, okay, this is not to me. So we will keep going. So we all are biased, and we're going to get into this a little bit further as we go. Again, if you have questions, please interject, please ask me. I would love to answer them. So let's keep going in this presentation. So let's talk about really, well, how are biases created and how are they reinforced? First and foremost, again, biases were really used very early on as a way of simplifying our world. We process so much information in a day that honestly, a bias is used to make a quick split level decision without having to completely process all of that information. Very early on, our biases were used to keep us alive, right? So I can eat this type of plant. This is poisonous. This snake will kill me. This one will not, right? It's really just to make a quick level split decision. Unfortunately, now, what has happened, we end up making those split level decisions or those quick decisions without really processing all of the information, and we can often use those on individuals. The thing about our biases is that once we have them, they're very, very difficult to break them. We have a term called reinforcement and disregarding. When we have a bias, anytime we have this bias, we are trying to reinforce that in our environment. We're looking for ways to say my bias is true and what I thought about something or someone, I can see that out in my environment and see how it's going to play itself out. When we have, again, that particular bias, when we see information or people who almost disrupt that bias, we disregard it as an exception to the rule. And so an example of this, just to bring this to point, and I'm sure many of you have probably heard someone say something to this sort, blank people, fill in the blank people are like this, but not you though. You're not like that. Again, that's an example of saying that that individual is an exception to the rule. So I'm going to disregard that individual is completely opposite of what I find to be true about my bias and essentially label them as being an exception to what holds true about this particular group of people, okay? What happens with our biases are assumptions, right? Because a bias in many regards is an assumption, and they can become self-fulfilling prophecies. So if I think a certain or particular group of people are lazy or hardworking, essentially I'm going to project that onto these individuals. And it's almost similar. I don't know if many of you are familiar with certain types of psychotherapy when we talk about our children. And in therapy, they encourage you not to label your children as being bad boys, or she's bad or she's not good, because essentially the child will live out to whatever that assumption is. The same goes for individuals as adults in different groups, whether it's for gender, whether it's for ethnicity or religion. Assumptions become self-fulfilling prophecies. So we have to be careful about what we assume about individuals. So when we go a little bit further in talking about, well, how are biases really reinforced? Quite simply, they are reinforced by our in-group attitudes. So what are our in-group attitudes? That's saying, oh, who are the people that we grew up with? Who are the people we live with? Who lives in our neighborhoods? What kind of churches do we frequent? And what do they believe about certain particular groups? Whatever the people that surround you generally believed, that is how our biases are almost reinforced and socialized through each individual. So that will be through family, through friends, so on and so forth. Now, I have on here media, and it's important to talk about this as well. For individuals that have limited exposure to difference, okay, often what can happen, we are left to understand our world and understand people that we may not have interaction with. We are forced to understand through what the media says about them. And I have an example for that. As I believe I told you guys in the last training, I used to counsel in the faculty staff assistance program. And I had a client, which of course I won't name his name, but I want to share this experience, who works here at the University of Delaware, obviously, because he was in our faculty staff assistance program. And he had told me he grew up in the rural South and was very open and honest in saying to me that he had never in his life interacted with someone that was African American until he came to the University of Delaware as a college student. Let me preface that by saying that first, as a college student. And so he was very open and honest in saying he absolutely believed that African American people were somehow inherently not as good or smart as his own race, which was a Caucasian man. And it wasn't until he had the exposure, and he came here to the University of Delaware during the 1960s, of course, Civil Rights Act. We had a lot of expression, of course, over war in Vietnam, so on and so forth. And it wasn't until he was exposed to this difference, it opened his mind on taking another perspective, was he able to break down his own bias that he had toward Black people. I asked him very openly, well, if you never had any interaction with anyone that was African American, how did you believe that about African Americans? And quite simply, it was from his in-group attitudes and from what he learned in the media. And just as a little hot button just to talk about this, when we even think about the media even gives us different messages. Let's think about what Fox News would tell us about Muslims as opposed to CNN, right? I'm pretty sure some of you are like, oh yeah, okay, we're gonna get a lot of difference in opinion on that. And that's just to bring that out into play. What you have to understand, and I wanna talk about this here, if you look to the right of the screen, I have a little caricature. Two women, obviously, and one with sunglasses on and a bikini, which we can presume that's probably someone in American culture. Everything covered but her eyes. What a cruel male-dominated culture. And then we have another woman in full garb saying, nothing covered but her eyes. What a cruel male-dominated culture. And that's just a small example of whoever you are, what your social identity is, comes with different experiences and ways of breaking down your world. We have two women obviously saying the same things about one another. And that's just a small example of where you are in our world and who you are in our world. That will determine what your biases are and what you believe to be right or to be wrong, to be inclusive or not. And that's just a small example. I'm going to take another short moment really quickly just to check the chat and make sure no one's asking me any questions. Nope. Okay, no questions. We're going to go ahead and keep going. So as we talk about, okay, biases, right? We're going to bring up a couple examples that I really want to bring out into play. So first we'll start here, okay, with this little caricature. And so the bias or the presumption that if someone doesn't speak English, they are somehow not American. Yes, people actually say that, guys. People actually believe that. Not a good bias. This would be considered a bad bias. We cannot assume that because individuals don't speak English, that somehow they're less American than myself or than you or anyone else sitting out there. And oftentimes where we see this type of bias happening is, let's say we have coworkers that are on a lunch break and they're Latino or Latina, and they're speaking Spanish to each other on their lunch break. I have had individuals who are upset about individuals sharing their own native language. That is something we should not be upset about, right? Now, if it comes to our everyday business and we're in a a round table business meeting and people start speaking another language that you don't understand, okay, then we can be upset about that because we all need to understand what's going on. But the bias that someone is somehow less American because they speak another language, again, that's not a good bias. Let's move over here. Okay, good bias or bad bias. The presumption that if you're going on a job interview, you should probably dress business professional. That's a good bias to have, guys. You're probably going to win with that, right? If you show up in your sweatshirt and tattered jeans, you might not get the job. So in this sense, having a bias that you should dress professionally for a job interview, good bias. Let's go down here, right, when we're talking about individuals with disabilities. Okay, the assumption that somehow if someone has a disability, they are living a lesser quality of life. Bad bias to have. And I don't believe I shared this, I did share this point with you guys. I told you about how when I was in Antigua and I was at an all-inclusive resort, I tried to help a gentleman who was in a wheelchair, took his plate, wanted to help him service himself at the buffet. And essentially he snatched the plate right back from me and told me he didn't need my help and that it was rude of me to assume that he needed help just because he was in a wheelchair. And I would have to say, as embarrassed as I was, this was, again, me using my own abled body bias that somehow, because I have all use of my limbs, someone that doesn't needs my help or somehow living a lesser quality of life. That is a bad bias. Let's go over to the left, right? Let's look at the babies. Babies are cute, right? Can't go wrong with saying babies are cute. Not a bad bias. Who doesn't like a baby? If you don't, that's okay, all right? But at the end of the day, the assumptions that babies or puppies are cute, not a bad bias to have. Now let's talk about this. This is loaded. Let's talk about the police. The bias that, of course, we all know that in our society we have a huge issue going on with police brutality. Someone's camera there. Okay, we're okay. Police brutality and the assumption that all police officers are bad or inherently bad or corrupt in the system. Again, not a good bias at all. Now, are there some bad apples out there? Absolutely. But can we make a blanket statement and say that just because you are a police officer, you're somehow a dirty cop or abusing your power or system? That's not a good bias to have, but is a bias that many individuals out there have. Let's go to this last one here. This is my favorite, right? And the assumption that for women, this is a bias that often is used against women, that if you aren't married or if you don't want to have children, something is inherently wrong with you. Again, not a good bias to have. We cannot assume that. And I really wish I would be very open and disclosing to you guys that I will be 32 on the 20th of this month. And if I'm single, I don't have children, and if I had $1 for every time someone was concerned about my uterus, I would probably be a millionaire. Yes, this is true, right? Because again, what does our society say about women? Our society says, yes, well, you're not fulfilled unless you have a child or that you're married. And something must be wrong with you if you're not having children or you're not married. You must be crazy or something's a little off with you. Again, I'm poking fun at it, but these are biases that are used in our society, and that is not a good bias to have. I'm going to check in. I see something coming in the chat, and I just want to make sure it's not a question okay, thank you. I appreciate that. So we're gonna keep going, but again, this is just another bias that I wanted to share. Let's keep rolling as we go through. Now, what's important to understand, and I just want to talk about this. Some of you may already understand this, but if you don't, we're gonna talk about it again. So when do biases become problematic? Quite simply, as you can see here, as you can see on this screen, stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination all derive from our biases, okay? When we talk about a stereotype, quite simply, it's generally based off an experience. It can be a one-time experience, and it could be experience that has happened more than once. But what we do with that experience is we take that experience and we apply it to an entire group of people, whoever that experience was associated with, and say this entire group is now like that. Moving down into what is a prejudice? Well, when we're talking about prejudices, they're not based off of experience. So when I told you about the gentleman that I used to counsel in faculty staff assistance program, never had any interaction, nor knew anyone that was African American, but had the preconceived notion that they were inherently less, not as smart, not as worthy, so on and so forth. That would be an example of being prejudiced. You have no experience to base it on, but yet you believe this about an entire group of people. When we talk about discrimination, what we're saying here is we're taking the stereotype or we're taking a prejudice and now we're putting it into action. So that's saying, I only like to hire men for these upper positions, upper management positions, or I only want to work with women, or I don't like to hire Hispanics, right? That is now taking those biases or taking that stereotype, taking that prejudice for whatever reason we believe about certain groups of people, and then putting it into action with what we're doing. Now, these are some of the more overt ways that we talk about biases and talk about racism or sexism or homophobia, okay, it goes on, or xenophobia, right? But while this is important to discuss, we really need to talk about more of the subtle ways that our biases can come out into play and really affect how we're creating inclusive climates around in our units and within our workplace. And that's going to be going into microaggressions. Now, this is a new phrase that's been termed in the early 2000s. Dr. Michael Sue is the originator of this term microaggression. And so what is a microaggression? Essentially, it can be intentional. Most times it's unintentional, and we'll get into that in a moment. Usually a slight, whether it be verbal or nonverbal, or a snub that is generally comes off as an insult and communicates hostile or some type of negative message towards the outgroup. So when we talk about outgroups, what are outgroups? If you are heterosexual, the outgroup would be anyone that's a part of the LGBTQ community. If you are a man, then the outgroup would be women, okay? If you are Christian or Catholic, then the outgroups would be anyone that is not Christian or Catholic, right? Because these are the majority groups that we're talking about within our society. Now, what happens with the microaggressor? Generally speaking, and again, we're going to get into this further, they happen from well-intended individuals who do not intend to offend you, to hurt you, are not trying to purposely be derogatory, okay? I have to say that because, again, well-intended individuals is very important to understand. And it's also going to help humanize this and showing you that we can all be microaggressors in one way or another, and I'll get into that in a moment. Microaggressions happen in everyday interactions and conversations. And because they're often, as the term says, micro, small, tiny, they generally go unacknowledged, but leaves the target of these situations really feeling as if they have no answer, feeling slighted, and not sure really what to do or say. And I'll get into that in this next slide. So when we talk about microaggressions, there are three types of microaggressions, okay? The most offensive of them, the most egregious, would be micro assaults. So what is a micro assault? This is an intentional slur, and this would be calling someone the N-word, or calling someone of the LGBTQ community the F word, or calling women, the C word, which is cunt. We're going to just say the words, guys. We're all adults. I don't know why I'm saying this like this is, a PG-13 movie. We can actually say the terms. So calling someone a cunt, calling someone a nigger, calling someone a faggot. These are micro assaults, okay? And generally, you're not going to see that too often, especially in the workplace. But what we have to, again, and they all three of these create negative environments and hostile feelings for the outgroup members. But what we have to be more concerned here is really talking about micro insults and micro invalidations. So what is a micro insult? And we're going to get into examples of these because I know I'm giving you a lot of information here, but I absolutely want you to understand what it is that we're trying to communicate and talk about here. But a micro insult is a subtle way of conveying a type of rudeness or insensitivity that is really used to demean a person's identity, whichever way they're associated with. So I'm going to share my own personal things that I have. I have multiple ways that I have been microaggressed against. And my first is talking racial microaggressions. So to be clear, there are different types of microaggressions. You have gender microaggressions, you have sexuality microaggressions, and then of course you have racial microaggressions. So in a racial microaggression, I can talk about a specific situation that happened to me about a year ago. So just gonna give you guys a quick tutorial one-on-one on black hair, okay? You're welcome, don't worry about it because we can talk about it here. For Black women, when we African-American women talk about going natural, essentially what we're saying is we're no longer perming our hair. So Black people call a perm, when we perm our hair, it is chemically processing our hair to be straight. I know when white people perm their hair, that means chemically processing your hair to be curly. Okay, so it's a switch, it's a swap. Now, going natural would be what you see here. You see my hair, okay, it's kinky, it's curly, whatever you want to call it. You see afros and things of that sort. Essentially, I'm saying, I'm going to let my hair grow out of my head the way that it grows out of my head without chemically processing it. So I had a coworker who I love dearly, and we're going to get into that in a moment. It was my first time wearing my hair out like this. Usually I have my hair pinned back in a bun or something tightly in a ponytail or something of that sort. So her first time seeing me, I'm feeling really good about myself. I'm going to work, feeling good, minding my own business. And my coworker, we'll call her Sarah, says to me, "Oh my God, Jen, look at your wild and crazy hair," and like backs up, like almost like my hair was going to attack her of some sort, right? And in this moment, right, she says that to me, and we have this long pause like this. I don't say anything, she doesn't say anything. It's very awkward and weird. But in that moment, I'm going to explain to you how I took the impact of that situation. She referenced my hair as wild and crazy. Now, mind you, I'm thinking when I got up in the morning, I groomed myself, I took good care of my hair, it's looking moisturized, I'm feeling good about myself. And so for someone to reference my hair as wild and crazy, I'm thinking, hold on a minute. I don't have stars in my head. There's no business in the front, party in the back with a mullet. No, I don't have rainbow colored hair. It doesn't look like clown hair. This is just actually my hair and how it grows out of my head. And someone just referenced it as wild and crazy, right? Now, again, I will be very honest in telling you, this coworker who we did work through that did not intend to offend me, okay? But what was the impact of that situation was me really feeling demeaned about my personal identity. So that's an example of a racial microaggression. Very small, very subtle, but again, it's demeaning to who I am. Another example, I'll give you a gender microaggression, right? Oh, women, you guys are going to completely relate to this. So my first day working here, I oversee the 9 diversity caucuses here on campus. And one of the caucus chairs, I won't tell you which caucus, has a male co-chair. And so I'm going into a business meeting to meet his counterpart, okay? And this is my first time meeting this individual. I'm introducing myself to these groups. I control their budget. I oversee them. And so I want to take an opportunity to get to know each of the chairs. And so in his first time meeting me, we met first, and he's introducing me to his colleague. And he says, "Oh, I want you to meet my beautiful wife." What? Right. Okay. I know some of the women out there, I know you guys are thinking, what in the world is going on? Now, mind you, we are not at happy hour. We're not at lunch. This is a business meeting. So for me as a woman, how did that feel? What was the impact? The impact of that situation was, why must I be delegated to being your wife or beautiful, when in essence, in doing my job, I want to be known for more than that, right? How does that make sense? Now, of course, let's talk about what a microinvalidation is, and I'm going to explain his response to help you understand microinvalidation. Microinvalidation is now saying, whatever it is that you're feeling, whatever thoughts you have about a certain situation, they're not that important and you should get over it. Okay. So an example of that, of course, what I said to this co-chair, I'm really uncomfortable. I said to him after the meeting, I'm very uncomfortable with you referencing me as your wife or being beautiful. How about my name? And I'm the associate director of OEI. His response to me, oh, you need to relax. Like, not a big deal. Like, I called you beautiful. Why are you upset? Again, guys, come on. Seriously, that's an example of a micro invalidation. In that point, I'm trying to negate what your feelings are. So I'm expressing to you an issue, and now it is being trivialized or marginalized down to not being that important. Other examples of micro invalidations would be, I don't see color, or I don't see you as Black, or how do you not? Do you see my skin color? Nothing wrong with it. I'm okay saying I'm a Black woman, and you can see that I'm a Black woman. So by invalidating what I am and saying, well, I don't really see you as Black. Again, another example of a micro invalidation. Are there any questions on that? I know I'm giving a lot of info, but we'll keep going. So now I want to just show you guys, these studies were brought from I Am Harvard, and these were students, and the next slide, it's a couple of caricatures that I added in, but all of the human examples are from a study called I Am Harvard, where students that have experienced microaggressions brought up some instances of things that people have said to them that have made them feel marginalized. So here's an example here. Why do you sound white? Right? And that's also another microaggression that I've absolutely received. Oh, you speak really well for a Black person. What we have to be concerned here with microaggressions is not the intent, not the intention, right? Of course, not the intention, but what is the impact and what is our language communicating? To say to an individual, you speak well for a Black person, quite simply, that's communicating Black people don't speak well or are not articulate. That is the underlying message that is being conveyed when you make a comment like that. Why do you sound white? And again, now when you say something like that, it's essentially saying only white people articulate or speak well. We all know that's not true. There are all races and different walks of people that use slang or don't use proper English, and that's not specific to a race, but I just wanted to bring that example out to you. Oh, I meant, where are you from? Now, I know some of you are probably wondering, well, I don't really see why that's a big deal. I'm not saying when you initially ask someone, where are you from? And they may say, I'm from Texas. And then people say, no, where are you really from? Again, what is that communicating? That is communicating, guess what? You're not from here. You're not from America. You're clearly from another country. Where are you really from? It's okay to ask people what is their ethnic background or what ethnicity are they? But to presume that somehow you're not from here, again, this is not communication that really is going to support inclusivity or make individuals feel valued. Let's do another. You're lucky to be Black, so easy to get into college. And that's another story for another day, okay? When we talk about affirmative action, I'm not going to get into this right now because I can talk to you about that for the rest of the day. But I just wanted to give you an example. Let's go to another. You're not really Asian. Again, what are Asian people really like? What are we communicating? What does that say? How are we essentially stereotyping or using our bias against certain groups of people? You don't speak Spanish, so saying to a Latino or Hispanic person, you don't speak Spanish, like somehow you're not as Spanish if you don't speak Spanish. Again, they can be just as American as us. I don't speak another language, but can we say that to someone who is Hispanic? Oh, you don't speak Spanish? Again, how is it communicating a demeaning way in the way that we use our language? Let's go into gender microaggressions. Act more like a lady, be a woman, put back into your place, right? That goes with the whole concept of women should be barefoot and at home raising babies, right? Not. I don't believe that. And neither should you. Let's go to another. This is for men because men can have microaggressions against them as well. You're going to stay home with the baby. Are you really going to let your wife wear the pants in the relationship, right? And I'm sure this has happened to some of the men out there, especially men that are very heavily involved with their children or child rearing or taking care of their family, to somehow think or presume that he's less of a man because he does this. Not okay. Again, we're not being inclusive when we use this type of language. You didn't let him pay. Are you a man or are you a woman? And why haven't you found a husband yet? Guys, This is not okay. This is not okay. We cannot use this type of language. Again, think about how that impacts the individual. I'm going to just check. I see a question. Okay, right, let's keep going. That's not for me. So let's talk about sexual orientation microaggressions. So going here, let's see our first one. So who's the man in the relationship? I'm pretty sure you guys are all cringing at me pulling up these examples, but these are things that people actually say. Dude, I totally forgot you were gay when we played basketball earlier. Again, gay people don't play basketball. I didn't know that sports was only for heterosexuals. Again, that's what it's communicating. Was that probably the intention of the individual that said that to him? Probably not. I can guarantee you it probably wasn't. But what was the impact? And again, when I keep emphasizing intent versus impact, I want to just bring a small example when we talk about intent versus impact. I didn't intend to slam into the back of your car while we're driving on 896, okay? It was not my intention. I am terribly sorry, okay? But guess what? Me not intending to hit the back of your car doesn't mean that I'm not responsible for the impact and the damage that has occurred, right? If we go around saying, well, I didn't mean to do that, so therefore I shouldn't be responsible for it, that's not how it works. And I can use, again, using the example of if we slam into the back of someone's car, our intention was not to hit them. However, what we have to be responsible for is the impact of what we did. Intention, impact, total can be completely different, all right? We don't intend to offend individuals, but if they are offended, we have to be responsible for how our words or the way that we communicate can harm or affect other individuals. Let's go to another. That's totally cool with me as long as I can watch. Again, people say these things. Have you ever had real sex? And I want to bring a point to this. Does someone have a question? No, someone just unmuted on accident. Have you ever had real sex? The idea that only heterosexual people or only heterosexual sex is real sex, how does that impact a member of the LGBTQ community to feel as if somehow they are not as valid because they are not like us? And by us, I'm saying because I'm heterosexual. So because they're not like me, somehow they are less than. That is what that language is communicating. Lastly, this is my gay best friend. Again, bringing to point, these are all types of expressions or things that we say. And again, as you can see, probably not meant to purposefully offend, but what does it leave the individual feeling? Not valued, not included, and demeaned in some way or another. Let's keep going. So it's important to talk about invalidating experience because very much so in the society that we are, individuals get caught up in, oh my goodness, we're being too politically correct, okay? We're being too politically correct. In my opinion, and how we believe in OEI, being politically correct is being sensitive to the needs of other individuals, irrespective of your background or where you come from. Okay, and I'm going to give you another oops on my part because again, there are ways that biases play themselves out, and I know you guys are going to probably throw tomatoes through the screen on me on this one, but I'm going to share it anyways, just to make a point here. I have a friend who is in a weight loss journey, okay? And we went to the gym together. And one of her comments was, oh my gosh, I feel so fat. And I proceed to say, okay, you're going to stone me on this. I already know. I say to her, well, your face is still pretty. Yes, I said that. And of course, she was absolutely offended, as she should have been. Because essentially what I'm telling you, your face is fine, but the rest of you, not so much. But how insensitive of that was for me to say something in that sort. Again, my intention in saying that was to be kind or to make her feel better. But what did I communicate to her? Insensitivity, rudeness. Now, could I have stood on my horse and said, well, I only meant it as a compliment, so you shouldn't be upset about it? No, I couldn't do that. I had to apologize for what I said, which was completely wrong. I realized the error of my ways, and I'm just going to show you that me too, as the commentator, as the individual who is training you on microaggressions, I too have messed up and said things that I wish I could take back. But what can I do? I can only take responsibility for that. Now, invalidating her experience would have said, oh, well, the way that you feel about it, it's not that big of a deal. You need to get over it. The co-chair, what he said to me, he tried to invalidate my experience. It's essentially saying that a person's thoughts or the way that they feel, we're going to reject them, we're going to ignore it, or we're going to judge it and saying, oh, well, maybe you're too sensitive, or you need to get over it, or build a tough skin or a thick skin. That's not what we should do. What does invalidating experience mean? It can happen in multiple. What does it look like? It can happen in multiple ways. One, with our language, by quite simply saying, not a big deal. That's not how I wanted to. I didn't mean to offend you in that way, so you therefore should not be upset. Or it can be in nonverbal communication. So when people are talking about their experiences, if we pull out our phone and we're like, okay, I'm just gonna look at my emails during this meeting. I'm gonna tap my fingers on the desk. I'm gonna look everywhere except at you and listening to what your point is. That is what it looks like to invalidate someone's thoughts or their experience. Why does it happen? Now, oftentimes, and let me just check in and make sure that someone's not chatting me. Okay, so I want to say this out loud. I'm not going to say who said it, but I would like to share this because this is an important point. So the comment is that I have heard grumbles from people before that diversity training is geared towards white people because examples are often not about white people being discriminated against, which does happen. Yes, it does happen. You know what I mean? I do know what you mean. How do I respond to someone who says something like that? Because obviously if they go into it that way, they will not benefit from it. Yes, this is a very, very important point. And I want to be clear in saying that when we're talking about microaggressions, this is not specific to it only happens to ethnic minorities. That is not true. It can absolutely happen across the same way. Essentially, when we are stereotyping a group, which we are irrespective of skin color, irrespective of gender, we can discriminate against other people. We can stereotype other individuals. And we're going to talk about in a moment at the end of this workshop on ways that we can interject and defend ourselves or say that we have issues. So that was a very good point, and thank you for sharing that because I want to ensure that this is not just a black or white thing or a gay or straight thing, and we're only focusing on the majority groups. This is across the board and something, as I've shared my own examples, that we can be guilty of doing with our language. So that's very important to understand. But what I want you guys, and thank you for that comment and saying so, what I want you guys to understand here is that oftentimes what will happen when we invalidate individuals' experience is we try to minimize what they're saying, we try to deny what they're saying, or we try to judge or blame people for the way that they feel. Oftentimes we have good intentions, but maybe we feel uncomfortable talking about some of these experiences. And we have to be honest in saying, yes, guys, this can be difficult to talk about. These can be uncomfortable conversations, absolutely. But we cannot overcome these instances. We cannot be more inclusive if we do not have these conversations. So they're uncomfortable, but my favorite phrase is we as a society have to learn how to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's the only way that we can truly merge forward and truly change. Let's keep going. How does invalidating experience affect us? Quite simply, on any part of anyone who's having their experience invalidated, it disrupts our relationships and creates a distance between each other. And how can it affect the target? Well, quite simply, I'm left to feel like this is my problem to get over and no one else's, right? The self-esteem and well-being absolutely affects us. So what can we do? What should we do? We can validate one another. Now, what validation doesn't mean, and what I often hear from people is saying, well, you know what? I don't agree with it, or I feel like I'm lying to them. That is not what that means. When we validate an experience, it doesn't mean we agree. It doesn't mean that we're lying to them. It's quite simply saying, I'm going to try to understand where you are coming from. And I see a couple more chats coming in. I just want to make sure that they're not for me because I don't want to miss anyone. if they'll come up. We'll give me a second when that goes back. So let's keep going. Now, how do microaggressions affect the individual? Quite simply, it can lead to depression, stress, and physical fatigue, and mainly feelings of alienation. You don't feel that you are a part of the group and that you can, in many ways, be invalidated for such. How does it affect our groups as a whole? Quite simply, it can lead to decreased work productivity. Obviously, as I said before, if we're feeling alienated, well, that's going to bring about less cohesion in our teams. And if we have less cohesion, if we're feeling hopeless, if we're feeling alienated, quite simply, we're going to leave our jobs. And that's what ends up happening. Okay, just people signing in. So let's keep going. I'm going to keep going. Now, I know that a lot of you may be feeling great, Jen. So essentially, I need to come to work and not say anything to anyone ever. No, I don't want you to feel like that, right? What you have to be clear in this situation, I want you to be clear about this. We are all going to be guilty at one point or another, whether it's tomorrow, whether it was yesterday, whether it's next week. One of us and all of us will be guilty of saying something that was insensitive or not very inclusive. We're all going to be guilty. Leverage, what we should be more concerned with, what gives us leeway, what studies have shown is that individuals who lead with equity and fairness. So what does that mean? As my coworker, so my care worker, Sarah, that I told you that made the comment about my hair, I have never seen Sarah be unfair to anyone. I have always seen her be equitable, respectful, and kind. So in that instance, because I knew that about Sarah, when she made that slip up that offended me, I was able to get past it because I've only known Sarah to be a person of integrity. That's what we have to be concerned with, not with what we say, like when we say it, because we're going to say something that we should not say or we should take back, but more so, are we leading with equity and fairness? Studies show that when individuals are fair and equitable, it decreases the impact of when we make comments that are insensitive. Because you know what? At the end of the day, people were able to say, you know what? Jim is not like that. Jim is a fair person, and that was just a slip up. The same that happened with my friend when I made that comment to her. Jen is a good person. She's always treated me kind. What she said was insensitive, and we're going to work past that. That's what we need to be concerned with being fair and being equitable. And that's how people will be able to forgive us for the things that we say when we microaggress against each other. How do we overcome these microaggressions? First and foremost, constant awareness. When you know better, you do better. Quite simply, that's it. We're going to be aware now of how we're interacting. How do my words impact another individual? Emotional intelligence, empathy, use it. It will help you. You will be a better person because of it. Experience a different reality. So if you have limited information about particular groups or about women or about ethnic minorities or about anyone, how can I connect to them? Quite simply by taking a walk in their shoes. Connect with someone that's different than you. The best way for us to get over our biases or to get over our presumptions and what we think about certain groups is to experience a different reality. The next part of that is saying we can't be defensive. What often happens in our society is I tell you I'm offended, and then you tell me I'm offended that you're offended by what I said. Guys, we cannot do that. We cannot do that, right? You can't come to me and say that you're upset about something I said, and then I say, well, I'm upset that you're upset about something that I said. Doesn't work that way. We can't be defensive. We have to be open to the discussion. That's the next point, right? I'm going to be open to what you have to say and how it has impacted you and try to work through that. That's how we build bridges. That's how we connect with each other. And that's how we can create more inclusive environments. And then lastly, being an ally. So what does that mean? Being an ally is saying we are confronting other individuals when they make sexist jokes. We are confronting people when they use stereotypes or use language such as those people or they always or you know how they are. We are confronting people when they're using this type of stereotypical language. And then we are advocating for individuals I can tell you right now, and this is a perfect example. I am a part of the heterosexual community. However, if individuals around me are saying things such as, oh, that's so gay, or, oh, you know, he is a fag, or something of that sort, I am immediately not going to allow that to happen to me. Even though I'm not a part of the LGBT community, I am going to take a stand, ally, and advocate for any individual that is being talked about in a disparaging way. And that's what we should do for each other. That's how we build communities. Let's go now into, well, how do we take action? First and foremost, we have to assess our timing. Before any type of confrontation, before we interject on any regards, we first need to assess, well, is this the right time to do this? Guess what, guys? At your business roundtable, or even here on this workshop that we're doing, probably not a good idea to call out your boss for being sexist in front of everyone. Not a good idea. Not a good idea. Not going to help you, right? So assessing the timing. When's the appropriate time that I can feel like this individual will be receptive to what I say? Is it one-on-one? Is it privately? Is it after the meeting? What's the timing? Next, assessing your ability to intervene. Again, this is also very important. What can happen with situations when we talk about race, when we talk about gender, when we talk about religion or culture or sexuality? It can be very emotionally charged. But I will tell you this, and being honest, we cannot go at these situations with heightened emotion. Why? Because now I no longer hear the message that you're trying to communicate to me. I can only hear your emotion. What's that going to do for me as an individual? I'm going to be defensive. I'm going to put a wall up because I feel like I need to protect myself. I'm not feeling very comfortable or safe. And that's not the way that we want to confront confrontations, if that makes sense. The next part of that is really being able to set your limits. So at what point are we going to throw in the white towel or raise the white flag and say, you know what, I'm going to walk away because this person is not going to be receptive? All of us have that breaking point. Our threshold is going to be different for each individual, and we as the person have to decide at what point is enough, and am I going to just walk away? And then lastly, realizing not every confrontation is going to go the way that we want it. There may be unintended consequences. Like I said before, people may be upset for you calling them out on some of the language that they use or the way that they've impacted you or made you feel. Hopefully not. I hope that most of you after this workshop will feel more comfortable with these conversations or having them with your coworkers and the people that you know. Going into taking action as a bystander or as a target. Let me explain this first. First and foremost is speaking for yourself. If you're a bystander and you're interjecting on behalf of someone else, we're not going to say, hey, guess what? Sarah doesn't like when you talk to her that way. No, we're going to take ownership of the situation. I'm uncomfortable with the language that you're using. I'm uncomfortable with the jokes that you're making. Speak for yourself. The next part of that is challenging the behavior and not the person, okay? As I said before, most of us are well-intended individuals when we make certain commentary or we use certain communications. We don't intend to offend. So we don't want to attack the individual. We want to attack the behavior, right? So we're not going to say, hey, guess what, Jim? You're a jerk for saying that. Maybe Jim is a jerk, but we're not going to call Jim a jerk. We're going to say, you know, Jim, I don't like when you make sexist jokes in the workplace. It makes me very uncomfortable, right? We're not going to call Jim a sexist pig. We're just going to say, Jim, your behavior is somewhat sexist and I don't appreciate it. That's important. The next part of that, as I said before, you have to keep your cool, okay? We have to stay calm. We have to keep our emotions at bay. And if you don't feel that you're in a position to respond appropriately, wait, sleep on it. Gather yourself, articulate your thoughts before you go back to that individuals, and keep your expectations reasonable. What I say here at the end of the day, if we can get individuals to say, you know what, I never thought about it that way. That's a win, okay? That is a win. People are hard to change, and it's hard to change perspectives. So for someone to openly say, you know what, I never thought about this in that way, take that as a win, guys. Take that as a win. There's a chat. Let me just make sure there's no questions. Yes, that's a good point, to own and confront the behavior without attacking the individual. It is definitely difficult to be articulate when you're upset or think someone will not take you seriously. Absolutely. Sometimes it is hard to know what to say. Some like African Americans, some like Black, some like Hispanic, some like Latina. How do we know? Good question. I won't say who said that, but actually you all can see who said that. How do we know? The best way to understand how people like to be addressed is to simply ask them, how would you like me to reference you? And that can go for any group. This is not just in ethnicity. It can also be in people, for example, individuals that are transgender, right? Or maybe transitioning. It's not for us to decide what we should call them. It's for them to decide what we should call them. And quite simply, by just asking the open, honest question, how would you like to be referenced? Or what is appropriate way for me to reference you? I can guarantee you most individuals will be very, will take that in a very respectful way and actually appreciate the fact that you took the time to really ask, right? And that's the part that it comes to these emotionally charged situations. We are often intimidated in being able to ask open and direct questions. We can ask people, how would you like to be referenced? I would like to be respectful to your identity or to your group, and I would like to ask you what's the best way to reference you. That's okay, and that should be the way that we approach these conversations. Thank you guys for your feedback on that. Let's keep going here. What I want to end with here, because we're at the very end of this, are our takeaways. And the first, as I kept reiterating here, guys, is understanding that our intentions and our impact can absolutely be completely different. What we have to be responsible for is how we're impacting individuals, how our communication is either inhibiting or helping support inclusivity. We have to be responsible for how we are connecting to other human beings in our environment. Understand that your perspective is largely shaped by your social identity. Who you are in the world is how you will break down and perceive your world. And each individual, all of you sitting behind your TV screens or behind your computers and phones, it's all going to be different person to person. So use that first in a way to understand other individuals. We want you to have continued awareness and question your own biases. So, do I feel this way because it's justified, or is this a presumption? Those are questions, especially if you are in leadership roles or in management or in positions to hire or promote. These are the types of questions that we should be asking ourselves. Am I projecting a bias here? Responding effectively. What does that mean? That either means that we are communicating in a way that we're articulating our emotions, or if we're on the receiving end, it's saying, I'm not going to take this defensively. I'm going to try to be open-minded to another person's perspective. So responding effectively on both sides is very important for communication and important for inclusivity. And then lastly, what I would want you all to leave from here is saying that I will be an ally of inclusivity, whatever that means, right? So again, if we are hearing disparaging, derogatory, demeaning language used by some of our friends or coworkers, we're confronting that. We're allying for what is right, and what is right is for all individuals, irrespective of who you are, what your background is, where you are in the world. You deserve to be valued, you deserve to be included, and that's for all of us, and that is the takeaway I would like to leave you guys with. Here is our office information. If any of you have questions, concerns, would like to follow up with me after this workshop, we keep an open door policy. Please feel free to connect with me. Please feel free to call me. Some of you have emailed me afterward, and I will be sending a evaluation sheet because I would like to know how you guys like this workshop and if there's things that you feel that I could be doing better in the future going forward with these types of presentations. That is all I have for you. Again, thank you so very much for your time. Michelle and Alice, thank you for coordinating this for me. I hope that this was impactful and something that you guys will use going forward in the future. So thank you guys, and I hope you enjoy your rainy Friday. Thank you very much. Let me just check the chat for one more. Okay, and we're good. So thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for, I know, stretching your experience in presenting by doing it through Zoom technology. We appreciate it. You reached 40 people today.
Oh, great.
Using this technology, and so I know it's new to you, but you were just as real to us today by this technology as you are in the classroom. So enthusiastic and energetic as if you were standing in front of us. So I just say thank you, and I know that many of us have appreciated your approach to this. It's different than many of us have experienced. And we do appreciate that, and appreciate the training you're providing. And I know that many of us have experienced this with other audiences as well, and hope to share this and use this with other audiences and share this message as well. So we will be in touch, and we'll be happy to circulate your evaluation and have ways that we can do that for you as well. I think Alice has asked for people to check in to the chat pod so that we know who's registered for our attendance. We are doing that so we can follow up with folks, and also because we're sharing this as part of our civil rights training and documenting that we have had attendance at this for recording in our professional development for our civil rights documentation of this effort that we have made across the organization, that we can have that documentation. And Jennifer, I'd like to come back and talk to you and share with your office our civil rights efforts in this organization and get some feedback from that. We've talked about that in our leadership team. We have a guidebook that we're using, and I think we could use some benefit from your office to look at that and to help us with some things that we have in that. So I hope to follow up with you on that, and get some additional guidance for us as we work through that process.
Absolutely.
But thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Staff, have a great Friday. We now have a couple of things that you can follow up on with this. We'll continue to leave the session open so you can type into that chat pod, and then have a great Friday. It looks like since we started, I see a little bit of lightness out there, and maybe some of the rain has stopped, and you can finish up your reporting for the day and do your two-factor authentication training and get that all up to date, and have a great weekend ahead of you. And so I also wanted to mention, while I have a few of you online yet, that we received word about a life celebration for our dear departed colleague Rhonda Martel, and I'll be including that information in this week's Directors Weekly as well, as I get that in print. So thank you again, Jennifer. Thank you all for joining us,
you.
and we'll be in touch. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.